Hello and welcome to part 2 of our set review, where you viewers will be released like almost simultaneously, but we actually spent a few days between recording these two episodes, so we now have a little bit more insight when going through reminding cards with the Rumble and with Ahri. And yeah, let's just continue. Arthur is joining me again. And
Hi guys, it's Arthur again.
And I would say because we covered Pantheon and Canon already, so let's move on to the Mecha Yordles. And if you didn't know, you can find the Mecha Yordles over here in the client now with the Celestials Emperor's deck. And there's like, they're all like semi-cheap. There's 3 for 2 costs, and 2 3 costs, 2 4 costs, 2 5 costs, 2 6 costs. They're all multi-region, which is quite nice, except for these two. And they generally are a little bit better than average for the respective stats. Wouldn't say they're quite Celestial level, but just a little bit above average minions. Don't want to cover all of them, but basically this is the card pool that you will manifest from to manifest a Mecha Yordle. Okay, let's take a look at the first card immediately. It's the Squeaker. Off again. Squeaker. A 2-mana 1 augment, and in play you discard 1 to manifest a Mecha Yordle. So first, as notice, discarding 1 is not always a downside. It can actually be upside in most decks, and this card in particular is like in the Glory and Value Sai'nen package, where discarding is more often an upside. For example, you have these riders, how are they called? A Fallen Rider, which and discard gets bigger. You level up your Sai'nen if you do this combination. So discarding 1 might seem bad, but basically you upgrade a card and sometimes get a benefit out of it. It still comes with a 2-mana 1/1, so I don't know how amazing this will be, but I'm pretty sure it will still be playable. For our ratings, we have Misreal giving it a 3 out of 10. Echo.
So Herka gave it 6 to 7 out of 10. I'm pretty low on it. I also think it's 3 out of 10. And the reasoning is because, and maybe it's good to talk about the Mecha Yordles in general. So some of the observation that you made on the Mecha Yordles. So one is that they're similar to Celestials in the sense that they're generally overstated or undercosted. Um, and I would say they're probably about undercosted by about 1. So normally they are very good for their cost, but if they costed 1 more, they would probably be about appropriate for their stats and abilities. So in that sense, they're kind of similar to Celestials. The difference from Celestials is that they don't scale into the late game as well because there's no 7 cost, 8 costs, 9 cost, 10 cost Mecha Yordles. They're more kind of built for the mid game. And there's also nothing from the 0s and 1s either. So they go from 2 to 6. So with that in mind, so knowing they're about 1 cost undercosted, I would want the card that generates these, to manifest these, to be maybe about 1 cost overcosted. Squeaker is a 2-mana 1/1, which is very understated. And despite it having augment, you can't always reliably expect it to be a 2/1 before it trades. Because even though it generates a Mecha Yordle, if it's in the early game, you might want to make a Mecha Yordle that isn't directly something you can curve into. 3-drop or 4-drop. So a 2-mana 1/1 is very understated by more than 1, perhaps. Something that I'm comparing Squeaker to is maybe Spacey Sketcher, which is the 1-mana 1/1 Targon that discards a card to invoke a Celestial, which is 3 or less. That's obviously built more for the early game, But I feel like Spacey Sketcher is pretty good in expeditions because it's appropriately costed, and it gives you a Celestial. Whereas this, because it's so overcosted, despite you being able to catch back up with an undercosted Mecha Yordle, I feel like it's still not giving a good enough deal in totality. So overall, I don't think Squeaker is a particularly good Mecha Yordle manifester. But we've got some others on the way that I am a lot higher on. So
Okay, very interesting comparison because I personally don't like the Space Sketcher that much. The Squeaker felt better for me because the card it gives is actually useful, and I find that many of the Celestial cards that cost 3 or less are not that useful in expeditions, especially since the Snake nerf. And I played with Squeaker once, in like the last expedition run I recorded. It was okay, not amazing. I would give it a 4 out of 10.
okay.
Pretty similar. Okay, then let's move on to not quite the next one, but the removal spell Monster Harpoon. Monster Harpoon, Electro Harpoon. Just one of the two things Rumble does. He can shoot a harpoon, he can split flames. And yeah, Misrael is really high on it. He is like, this is a 10 out of 10. Which is surprising to me. Because 10 out of 10 is reserved for like super strong cards, basically. Like Howling Abyss that basically instantly win you the game. And he says, this card is mega busted, watch out. And yeah, it's basically 2 mana slow, you have to discard one, and then you do 2 to a unit and 2 to the enemy nexus. I'm not that high on it. It's basically a slow Mystic Shot that you have to discard a card for. And sure, it comes in Bandle City, which doesn't have a Mystic Shot yet. But this is generally the reach identity of Bandle City, to have multiple sources of small damage and small units, quote unquote, because some of them are really big now. But in general, so you don't really need too many sources of small damage. And I've played with Electro Harpoon. It's felt okay. You can discard a random generated card or even like a payoff card sometimes, kill a thing, and Mystic Shots are generally... Mystic Shot is pretty powerful. I would say this is a worse Mystic Shot despite dealing 2 to the enemy nexus in average. I would give it like a 6 out of 10. I don't think it's that good.
So Herco didn't give a rating on this. I'm surprised that you think it's a worse Mystic Shot and still give it a 6 out of 10. I think it's a much worse Mystic Shot. I gave it 3 out of 10. Essentially, how it compares to Mystic Shot is for 2 mana, you're doing 2 damage, usually to a unit in expeditions. And it's worse because it's slow. So the additional effect is you would discard 1 to do 2 damage to the enemy nexus. If there was a card, well, if I could discard 1 to deal 2 to the enemy nexus, I usually wouldn't. That is not a card that I would normally want, or an effect I would normally want. So in general, I think this is much worse. The exception that I would make is if you are trying to play this with discard synergies. So Noxus and Sai'nen especially has a lot of discard synergies with these, in which case maybe you'll see the discard as an upside. That's when it starts coming into its own. But without those, I think it's really bad Mystic Shard, and I would try to avoid this in my decks.
And my point is, how bad can a Mystic Shot really be? Like if you kill a Yordle Explorer, wouldn't you like, except discarding a card? I'm like pretty high on removal in general, and Battle City is different to PNC. So I think removal can't be that bad.
When it costs you a card down, I think it's pretty bad. I think it's automatically card disadvantage. You're 2 for 1ing yourself, right? So in fact, you're 2 for 1ing yourself for just 2 damage. Well, effectively 4 damage overall, but 2 damage to finish off something big or kill something small.
But you're playing Battle City. You never discard a real card to that. You discard like the Sword or Shield from the Yordle Squire. You discard random stuff you generated. And I've never discarded a real card to that.
Yeah, that's possible. But there's still resources that you're giving up on. Maybe you're not giving up on one card, maybe you're giving up on half a card. Another comparison I might make is maybe to Get Excited, in fact, because that actually does discard a card. And Get Excited normally feels pretty bad if you have to discard a real card rather than a created half a card or something like a Mushroom Cloud. And the fact that this is slow really, I think, hurts it in the sense that you can't use it in response or, uh, yeah, in combat. Um, yeah, not a fan.
Yeah, Get Excited is like pretty strong, I feel, like especially if you build around it a little bit. But it depends. Like we will see. But I thought it's a fair rating. Like go lower on it. Definitely wouldn't give it a 10 out of 10. Be like different. Okay, in my opinion, strongest champion in expeditions would be Rumble. If you come to him, he's like a 4 mana 5/4, already decent stat line. And on play, you can discard up to 3 cards, and it grants allied Rumbles everywhere impact, quick attack, spell shield. And then if you dealt 12 damage with him, basically attack twice because impact counts for that. He transforms, gets all of these keywords anyways, and because he has impact, like he gets impact 2 on the backside, and then when you deal damage to the enemy next to you create a Mecha Yordle in hand, or if you have one, you create all Mecha Yordles in hand +1/+1 and reduce the cost by 1. And one thing to notice about this is that it counts each instance of damage. So if you have like 3 impact triggers, it gives all of your Yordles in hand, or Mecha Yordles in hand, -3 cost and +3/+3, which can be pretty powerful, and he flips into the Flamespitter. We'll talk about that card later. And Rumble really surprised me. As you might have seen, my first run was with Rumble. Really wanted to try this guy out. And he felt pretty powerful because you give it spell shield. Of course, it's a big risk, big investment. And if it just dies to a random challenger unit, then it's sad. But if you invest these cards in, it's very hard to deal with Rumble easily. Like first attack, and they might run the Screeching Dragon into it. But if they don't, you basically flip him and basically just win because you just have this value generation. You get a 1 mana 8/8 oftentimes with a bunch of impact on the board. And I've been really surprised with Rumble. And for that reason, I would give him 8 out of 10. I think he's a very good mid-range champion. Multi-region. And Misreal disagrees and says it's a 4 out of 10 and too slow. What are your opinions?
So, Herco thinks it's 5 or 6 out of 10 if there's no discard fodder, or 8+ if there's lots of fodder. Personally, I'm also pretty high on him, but high for me means I think he's a 7 out of 10. On the basis, he's a 4 mana 5/4, but obviously that's not what we're trying to get him with. Ideally, you want to go all in on him and discard at least one so that he can level up more quickly, but usually 3 sometimes, just so that you can make sure that he levels up in 2 turns. If you discard 3 to him, and you get to attack on turn 4, it's very unlikely that they won't be able to. It's very unlikely that you won't be able to flip him by turn 6. If you're not running against challengers. So his weakness, obviously with Spell Shield and Quick Attack, is challengers, specifically, most likely Demacia challengers, so Screeching Dragon and the 5/4 challenger. Yeah, if Rumble is all in and you manage to discard 3 cards, then he flips very quickly, and then he should be able to recoup your card disadvantage that you managed with discarding the 3 cards at first, and then you can generate plenty of Mecha Yordles to stage your comeback. But it is quite an all-in strategy, and you've got to hope that they won't be able to stop him before he flips. Or they won't be able to kind of challenger him, or maybe pop his spell shield and then kill him some other way. So he's very much an all-in card, and I would generally want to play him with discard synergies so that you can turn that discard effect into a bonus rather than a cost.
I agree with that. I don't think you always want to discard 3 cards. Comes down a little bit to the matchup. For example, if you're like against Noxus, maybe Whirling Death still, but against Demacia, Shurima, they don't really have a good way to target him with spells. Of course, if you play against a Vengeance deck like Shadow Isles, then you want the Spell Shield all the time. I've found that I oftentimes discard just 2 cards to Rumble, because then the impact and quick attack is like worth it, and even if he dies, then it's not that bad. And I think it's a champion you want to have 3 copies of in your deck, because if you discard once, then your other copies are like leveled up already, so you don't have to discard again. And he's way better if you have like 3 of him than 1 of him.
Yep, that's fair. It depends on kind of what cards you have in your hand and what you can hope to curve into. So obviously trying to discard half cards or created cards if ideally.
And really sometimes just kills people, like as you might have seen in run. He just like discarded Scion, gave Rumble Overwhelm, and then it's a 6/5 Overwhelm, double impact, quick attack. And that's just very hard. If they can't remove it, then they just like die to it in 2 attacks anyways. Impact is definitely the keyword I underrated. It's insane how much random damage you stack up with him. Okay. Rumble. Let's move to the flip card, Flamespitter. Basically both Rumbles flip and also a separate card, Flamespitter. And he says, the burst spell, grant an ally +2/+0 in impact. I've seen this in Constructed already with Ahri. Seemed pretty sick. If you give Ahri impact and she like dashes around, then you get like 6 to 7 damage. I guess maximum 6 damage out of this impact damage alone. But generally, I don't really like this card. I have never been a big fan of Weapon Hilt, because I found that this +2/+0 is like so situational, because you can push more damage in. But at least this card is a Flamespitter is Grant. It compares more to Brothers Bond, which is a decent card, I would say, because it grants 2 allies +2/+0. But the Electro Flamespitter, I would still say, is very situational. You invest a second card into one of your cards, and you might have some cool combos with impact, or combos with impact. In general, I think this card will be too situational, and you don't want to have multiples in your deck. 1 is fine, but generally a card I would avoid. I would give it a 4 out of 10. Musial is a little bit higher on it. Musial gives it a 6 out of 10 commentary.
So Hoko gives it 7 to 8 out of 10. I'm a lot lower on it. I would give it 4 out of 10 as well, I think. I also compare it to Brothers Bond. And I think Brothers Bond is fine to have maybe 1 copy in your deck, because it can potentially get you a 2-for-1 in the sense that it will win you 2 combats, or sometimes just will push for 4 damage for the win in the end. This one maximum pushes for 3 damage at first, I guess. And it won't win you the 2 damage, but it will definitely give you the 1 point of damage, assuming you're attacking with the impact, whereas Brothers Bond won't be able to do that. But saying all of this, essentially a grant +2/+0 in impact. Ideally, what you want there is something which has low attack and high toughness, so that you can survive that combat, kill someone off, and then come back to attack again. That's what you're hoping for, and I don't think there's too much of that in Vandal City. And also, interestingly enough, it's Rumble's champion spell, but it doesn't work all that well with Rumble, I don't think, because Rumble essentially levels up in 2 attacks if you give him impact, regardless of whether you put Flamespitter on him or not. If you do put Flamespitter on him, he does 9 damage to first attack, and then he still takes 2 attacks to level up. So I don't think there's any obvious synergies there. With the level 2 Rumble, giving impact will create another random mech, or grant or buff your Mecha Yordles. But again, I think that's pretty low impact, funnily enough, to be worth a slot. So generally, I think these kind of power only combat spells I wouldn't really want in my deck much.
It's worth pointing out that this is the first real buff card Vandal City has. Before they could just like change shapes, like with the Pepperberry Shake, for example, or Minimorph. It's like the first true buff card they have, but it's only like attack, so I think this is still fine with Regent Entity. If like +2/+2, that would be weird, but still worth pointing out. Okay, next card to look on is the Arena Mechacaster. This is actually one of the few cards I haven't found yet in Expeditions. Arena Mechacaster, a dual region, Bandle City Noxus, 6 mana, 4/5 with attack, give other attacking allies +2/+0 this round. Played with it at a fair amount in Bandle Tree, and it's pretty insane, especially if you like generate it for something and have a wide board. It's of course a swarm payoff. You don't want to put this into a random deck with like in a mid-range deck, but if you are like a swarm deck, you can go wide, and this card really pushes in a lot of damage. It's a little bit weird with the Rumble card pool, but maybe let's talk about this later. Let's just talk about the Arena Mechacaster. So, Arena Mechacaster, Israel gives it a 7 out of 10. And like I want to be a little bit specific. Mr. says I want to have Yordles and arms to finish my game, but if I don't have one, this will be okay instead. I want to be a little bit more specific. I think it's if you are a swarm, that's like a 8 out of 10. But in other archetypes, it will be more of a 4 out of 10. Really depends on your deck how good this card will be. Similar to like the how's it called, the arena guy that gets like +1/+1 for each unit you have. It also depends
Arena
on your deck.
Battlecaster.
And not the Battlecaster, the other gun, the 4 mana.
In Noxus or?
Yes.
I'm trying to think. Legion Veteran?
Oh, 4 mana. Up right now. Noxus.
Our favorite?
Crowd favorite, exactly. This guy, of course, is similar. I would say that you really want to go wide. In a normal deck, he will be below average, but in a deck that builds around it. What are your opinions of the Mechacaster?
So Herko didn't give him a rating. Personally, I'm pretty low on him. I gave him 3 out of 10. This is an average across kind of swarm decks and non-swarm decks. And the reason for that is because I think it's pretty understated. 6 mana for a 4/5 means that he will usually only get 1 attack in at that point. And yeah, he's pretty understated for that. His effect is strong, and it will allow the rest of your small creatures to trade up with their bigger creatures, but it still give them the choice to do that unless you have Challenger, which isn't always relied upon. And the problem with kind of swarm synergies is that yes, you can build around swarm synergies, but you can't always assume that it will work in the sense that you will always have creatures, more creatures than they do, because sometimes they will simply trade or they will remove your small creatures or something like that. So those kind of synergies is somewhat fragile. So you can't always count yourself of having more creatures than they do. That's why I don't think it's particularly high on for me.
I have a follow-up question. Do you then like decisive maneuvers as a card?
Is that the +2/+0 fast, the
Yes.
stun and +2? I'm not a huge fan of that card.
Okay. Because that's what I would compare it to. And if you get like for 1 more mana, you get a 4/5 out of the deal. And of course, the stun doesn't happen. But I still think this would be a decent amount better. You want decisive maneuvers in your deck, you want this one even more.
I think I generally wouldn't want decisive maneuvers in my deck. Also, that works on the defense as well, right? So, and
Yes.
this doesn't.
But how often are you
Yeah.
using this maneuver in the defense? Like only for a stun maybe, but 5 mana stun on the defense. Doing something wrong then.
It works in a pinch. I've played with this size of maneuvers in my deck before as well, and having that option is useful. So yeah.
So let's quickly talk about the card pool with Rumble, because my guess is because Rumble has a lower appearance rate, other than the other champions. Cannon is in like 2 card pools. He has a lower, but higher, more games played with him. Ahri, and then like Pantheon. Pantheon has the most games played because he presumably wins more than the other two. And Rumble has the lowest amount of games played so far. And like my first guess was that he was only available through champion picks if you have like low-in value. But then on my last expedition run, we played on our first round against Rumble in round 1 basically with Rumblelution. That means he had to appear in this first pick basically, or the person would have had a lucky trade pick. But I don't find this very, very, very likely that they just trade picked into the last trade, gave them Rumble. And my other guess is that this is just like the glory in value bucket, and this bucket has existed before. So they have buffed the appearance rates of the new ones, the packs and pets, and the cannon and Ahri buckets, but forgot to buff the appearance rate of the glory in value bucket, and that's why Rumble shows up less often than the other 3 champions. Do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. This one is also an epic, so it's going to be harder to find,
Yeah.
even when we're searching for it. I don't know whether it is in there. I hope it is, because, as I said, I feel like in the previous episodes, I feel like we should be erring on the side of including cards rather than excluding cards. So even though I'm not particularly high on this, I think putting it in the pool and having variety is a good thing. So
Yeah.
we
So
will see it.
probably in there, but we will at some point show up. It's like harder to find because it doesn't show up that often. Okay, let's move on to a surprisingly good card, in my opinion, the Arena Promoter, a 4-mana 4/3 Battle City card with Tough, and on play you can discard, or you have to discard 1 to manifest the Mecha Yordle. It loses its cost by 1. Also, you can just play it as a 4-mana 4/3 as well. Most of the time you want to get the Mecha Yordle as well. And yeah, Misreal gives it a 7 out of 10, which I find that a fair rating. It's a good stats, and gives you an upgrade for your hand. And I found this Tough to be surprisingly annoying as well. They removed Tough before on the Stone Stackers, really something that Battle City had again, and now they have Tough units again. So a little bit confusing on that end, but it's still. Funny thing with Tough is that if you hit Rumble into Tough unit, you only deal 5 damage, not 6 damage, and he doesn't level up.
Okay.
Interesting interaction. But I would give it a 7 out of 10 as well. I think it's just a decent unit, decent stats, and upgrades on your cards. But nothing that blows me away.
Herco gives it an 8 out of 10. I agree with that. I also give it 8 out of 10. I'm pretty high on this. I think it's probably my favorite out of the manifestors, not including Rumble. So a 4-mana 4/3 Tough is effectively a 4-mana 4/4 with a bonus, right? And that is decent for its cost. I wouldn't say it's too overcosted or understated. So with that in mind, it being able to generate a Mecha Yordle is pretty great because, as we already discussed, Mecha Yordles are already undercosted by about 1. This allows you to reduce its cost by 1 further, which means you're getting something really reduced. So overall, I think this is a very good package for essentially about on-par stats, and then trading your worst card for a card that is undercosted by about 2. So with those reductions in cost, I guess what you're looking for to curve out from him is if you're playing him on 4, you're hoping to see one of the 2 6 costing ones and then have their cost reduced down by 1 so that they're 5 costing, so you can curve this 4 drop into a 5 drop, which was previously a 6 drop. If you manage to get that, then that's kind of the optimal curve to curve into. If you get one of the 5 drops that reduce to 4 drops, it's also a curve, but you're kind of floating 1 mana there. But obviously you don't get any choice over what cards you're manifesting, so those are only the upsides that you're hoping for.
Yeah, I think one of the 6 costs, like the Shadow Isles one, is like not that good in Expedition, so you discard a unit, and then when it dies, it summon an exact copy of this card unit. I really think you want to generate that one as often.
Yeah, that's true. We haven't talked about the specific Mecha Yordles, and I don't think we will because they're not draftable. But it depends on the situation, and yeah, sometimes maybe you want a cheaper one, just because it's actually still more effective than an more expensive one. Because some of these are going to be constructed plants, which are more effective and constructed than expeditions.
I was really surprised by the Targon one. I thought this one was trash, but figured I picked it. I think 3 out of 5 times or something. Because just giving the ally Space Shield is so powerful, and protected my Scion once for against the Vengeance, and and it's just very interesting effect. It's one that is pretty much overlooked, but again, don't have to talk about all of them. I think there's a situation for all of them basically.
So you say you protected it against vengeance. You must have manifested the Targon Geode Mechaforcer and then played it, and then before you attacked, they didn't vengeance?
Basically, I played my Scion after they had tapped under it, and on their attack token basically, and then they passed over and then protected my Scion on my open attack, and it itself had Space Shield as well, so they just couldn't deal with it. And they had because they attacked me, they played cards, and then I sneakily played my Scion, and then the Mechaforcer was already on the board, I think, Space Shield, so they couldn't kill it either. Then it gave my Scion Space Shield, which was n +2/+2, which was basically enough to kill them.
Fair enough.
Okay, let's move on to the Bilgerat Rascal. Red Rascal, now I found it. Is one of the first cards I made prismatic again. And yeah, this is a 3-mana 3/2 Yordle with discard 1 to manifest a Mecha Yordle and grant it Space Shield. I would say this one is a little bit weaker than the other one, although the Space Shield is really valuable on these random mid-range units because it's really hard for some decks to deal with them. Basically makes if you manifest a 5-drop, for example, or a 6-drop, just makes them into Rune Runners, which are very hard to deal with for some decks. And I think it's a little bit worse than the other one. I gave the other one a 7 out of 10, so I will give this one a 6 out of 10, but I still think it's a good card. And it's not that bad, I would say. They're pretty similar because the other one comes down 1 turn later. So it has less stats. I will give it a 6 out of 10. Wasn't sure about this one. And Misadv gave it a 5 out of 10.
Okay. So Herko gave it a 6 to 7 out of 10. I also think it's slightly worse than the Arena Promoter, but I was pretty high on that, so I'll give Bilgerat Rascal 7 out of 10. 3 mana 3/2 is overcosted by 1. So that's kind of what I would have expected, because the Mecha Yordles are undercosted by 1. It being able to grant Spell Shield is something extra that may be worth half a mana or something that is worthwhile. So overall, I think you're getting a pretty decent deal out of this. Comparing the effect from the Arena Promoter, reducing cost by 1 versus Spell Shield, I generally would prefer the reduction in cost because I normally wouldn't pay 1 mana for a Spell Shield, especially when some of these cards are mid-game cards that will not run away with the game if you give them Spell Shield. Sometimes they will, but they're not Celestials in the sense that they can be huge. The most expensive one is 6 mana, so eventually you'll get to a point where you won't be able to they'll be able to overcome it just with creatures, even if you do have Spell Shield on it. The interesting curve from Bilgerat Rascal, which is 3-drop, is to look for the 4-drops here. So Professor Von Mech and Shadowtech Walker. And both of them are pretty decent, especially with, I guess, Spell Shield. on Shadow Tech Walker, which is already elusive. So those are kind of the ideal curves you're looking for. But obviously, it depends on what your game state is at that point. So
I'm just thinking about maybe the 5-drop, the Shurima one, the 5-6. You play against Darkness, for example, you give this one Spell Shield, and you're like, oh my god, I will have to cast 3 Darknesses now just to kill this thing. Because I first have to kill the Spell Shield, and it's still at 6 health. I have to play 2 more effects on it. Yeah, I would sometimes, like in some matchups, I would definitely pay 1 mana for a Spell Shield. Maybe not on average, but it really depends on which regions to play against.
yeah, I think it depends. Yeah.
Then we have the Fix Uppers, pretty weird card. And it was theorized before that this used to be 1 mana. Totally makes sense with me because we had like similar cards like the Bark Beast, for example, which is a 1 mana 1/1 that turns into a 3/3 eventually. Demacian, called Demacian Sentinel, Burgeoning. Also a 1/2 that turns into a 3/3 at some point. And Fix Uppers would be similar. It would cost 1 mana. Basically, first time you discard a card or damage the enemy nexus, grant me +2/+1. And it would certainly be a very strong card as 1 mana, because then it would just, whenever you deal damage first time, it would just be a 3/3, which is basically instantly in some aggressive decks. As a 2-cost card, I'm not that high on it, because it's just not good on turn 2. If like, I attack you on turn 2 with a Devouring Glory Seeker, it blocks, but with a 5/2, it doesn't block. And later in the game, it always turns into a 3/3, so I still wouldn't say it's a terrible card, because you will damage the enemy nexus at some point if you play like any impact cards or any stuff or direct damage. Then it's still a 2 mana 3/3, but it isn't always a 2 mana 3/3. And for the times it isn't, I would give it a lower rating, which I would say it's a 5 out of 10. Still think it's like valuable because it's eventually turning into a decent set unit, but not always, not in the early game so often. And Misra actually agrees with me. He gives it a 5 out of 10.
4 out of 10.
Oh, yeah, I put in the line. 4 out of 10. Looking.
Herco gave it 4 to 7 out of 10. I'm pretty low on this. I actually read it as a 1 mana 1/2 and was a lot higher on it. And then when I saw it was a 2 mana 1/2, I was instantly out. 2 mana 1/2 is very understated or overcosted. And even though the condition for it to get bigger is very easy, very cheap, with any discard damage or impact, even when it gets buffed, it's a 2 mana 3/3, which is not even overstated by much, because normally you would expect a 2 mana 3/2 with a slight bonus for that. So 2 mana 3/3 really isn't doing it. And if you are getting this effect any later than turn 2, those stats really starts to drop off in terms of scaling. The extra point of stat that you're getting stops becoming helpful, so or the helpfulness decays a lot more quickly. So I'm pretty low on this.
What was your rating again?
3 out of 10.
3 out of 10. I can see that. Yes, it's like our disagreement a little bit with, like, you say you always want to do something more powerful than average. That's why you give just average cards a worse rating. I'm thinking, yes, average is still fine. I think we like agree that this card is not that strong, but our ratings are a little bit differently in this regard. Okay, Arena, that guy, and then we have the Yordle Explorer, the obnoxious card in Constructed. I haven't seen this card yet. Done the work for the last week. It's a 2 mana 2/2 Yordle, and when you summon another Yordle, grant it +1/+1. And the first comparison that was made was with this one and Battlesmith. Battlesmith is the lead one, It's a 2-mana 2/2, and when you summon an elite, granted +1/+1, but it itself is not an elite. The other one is an elite, is a Yordle. So it's obviously faulted for power creep. And there are like a lot of Yordles in the game. I was surprised when I looked up again, and there are really a ton of different Yordles in any spell cost. So you will any region basically, and you will often then not find a ton of Yordles, whereas the elites are limited to one region, to Demacia. Still, it's a little bit of a slow and build around card, I would say. Certainly if you have like the sick Banner City 30 Yordle deck, it will be insane. But in your average deck with like say 10 Yordles, I would give it a 7 out of 10. Can certainly go up if you have no more Yordles, and if you have no Yordles, it's of course terrible. This is your only Yordle in the deck, then you did something wrong, probably not drafted Banner City enough. But it's a pretty high range from you, like from, depends on your Yordle count, it's like from 5 to 9 out of 10. Like, let's go low, if you have no Yordles, it's like a 4, 9 out of 10. Can be your best card in the deck, or can be just, and it won't be dying as often as in Constructed. In Constructed you just get this like Mystic Shot or dealt with. In Expedition this is very hard to remove effectively. You play Yordles, then it's strong, I would say. Misreal gives it a straight up 8 out of 10. No limitations. I would say Herko, okay.
Herko gives it 4 to 9, depending on the bucket. Personally, I'm very high on this. I gave it 8 out of 10. I think the comparison to Battlesmith is fair, and I like Battlesmith a lot in Expeditions. And the percentage of Yordles to Bandle City, I assume, is a lot higher than Elites to Demacia, because the whole idea of Bandle City is through a portal that only Yordles can access, and Elites are, don't make up a very large number of Demacia, otherwise they would be more common. So I think the effect that Yordle Explorer, the number of procs it will have is higher than your average Battlesmith decks can. So it should be quite easy to proc its buff. As a 2-mana 2/2, if you manage to get one more buff out of it, you're effectively getting 2 mana for 3/3 worth of stats. That's already a good deal. If you can't get anything, then you're getting a bad deal. But if you're getting any more than that, a 2-mana 4/4, 2-mana 5/5, and so on and so forth, if you manage to get 2-3 procs out of him, that's a lot. And I think very quickly he will put pressure on the board and be able to tempo his opponent out. And unlike the Yordle Captain that we discussed the last time, Yordle Explorer is something that you can curve out into. There's no restriction in terms of power or cost. It just cares about Yordles. So if you can continue making Yordles, then they'll all get buffs, and Yordles are also generally quite cheap and small anyway. So sometimes you might be able to double spell or triple spell and get multiple buffs immediately onto the board, which is very good, rather than just one buff per turn.
Yeah. One thing to mention, maybe I've only found this one in the World Travelers Tristana buckets, and doesn't really synergize with Tristana that well, since it's not a multi-region follower. Is Tristana Yordle? Stupid question. Tristana is a Yordle, yeah, of course. So maybe it synergizes still with it, just giving Tristana +1/+1. Another interesting thing I found is like where you just said if you get one buff out of it, it's a 2-mana 3/3, which is good. And before we looked at a 2-mana 3/3, and you were like, that's not that much better than average. So I think you'd really have to get like 2 or 3 buffs out of it to make it really worth it. Because just playing a 2-mana 2/2 on turn 2 can sometimes hurt you. And there are like decks that can do the big stats stuff better than Vandal City if you play against Shyvana, for example. Unlike Constructed, where Shyvana is unplayable because of Vandal Tree and combo decks. Expeditions, she's like all over the place. The Fusion Dragon is all over the place. The Master is the strongest region. And I think that just these random stats don't affect the game that much. That just 1+1+1 will be good enough. You really want to get like 2 out of it, I'd say.
And I think it will be quite easy to get 2 or 3 out of it, and that's the difference. That this starts off as a 2/2 rather than a 1/2, and it passes its stats onto other things and will continue scaling with the game. Whereas Fix and Uppers will just stay as a 2-mana 3/3 and won't progress any further than that.
Okay. Definitely a card to look out for. Can be strong, but really it depends a little bit on the deck. If you see this early on, it would definitely be a reason for me to the Yordle type thing and just draft more Bandicity. If you have this like on pack 2, 3, or 4, for example, I would definitely try to prioritize Yordles. But if you see this on turn 11 and have like 2 or 3 Yordles, it will probably not be amazing. Or pick 11. Okay, next one. I'm very interested to hear your opinion. It's the Mourned. This is a card I really like in Path of Champions. Yesterday I got when played, a starter free attack, and it was basically 1 mana deal 2 damage over and over again, which was really fun. I have seen this card in Expeditions, and I think the fairest comparison would be to the Flight. Flight, of course, being the Targon card, 1 mana, 2/1 elusive. Nexus Strike, draw 1, shuffle me to the top 3 cards of your deck. There's the Mourned, just Nexus Strike, recall me. The one thing you can do with the Flight, one thing I actually like to do is not attack with Flight and just use it as an elusive blocker. Big weakness of Targon is to play against Teemo, for example, because they have no way of dealing with a Teemo, so I just like the Flight as a defensive card, block Teemo, or Zoe, for example. And the Mourned could serve the same role, but Ione is generally more aggressive. Can also be used as a good elusive attacker. And like the recall me can be useful for like Ahri synergies and recall themes, leveling up your Ahri, but it can also just be like a small elusive threat over and over again. So I think it has some uses, but like having to resummon it over and over makes it a little bit weaker in my opinion. So like Misrael gave it an 8 out of 10 with the comment very easy to abuse. I would give it a 6 out of 10 because I just think the mana loss of playing 1 mana over and over again will just add up. Of course, if you play like recall synergies, it will be a little bit better. If you play Ahri, your general Ionia deck is a little bit worse.
So Herko gives it 6 to 7 out of 10. Personally, I'm pretty low on this. I gave it 4 out of 10, and that's only accounting for some of the recall synergies that Ahri or Kennen might want to have, or Yasuo, I guess. I think 1 mana for 2 damage, 2 Nexus damage, is not a deal I want to be doing unless I'm very aggressive. Usually I want to be committing to the board and putting tempo and stats onto the board rather than just doing Nexus burn. Because I think more games are won and lost on stats on a board and Expeditions. And also you can't say it's 1 mana 2 damage to the Nexus every 2 turns, because anytime the opponent has elusive creatures, then it stops being useful, being able to do what it's supposed to do anyway. I think the comparison to the Flight is very apt. I think it's pretty much the same thing as the Flight, except maybe a bit more easy to predict with. Predict is the wrong word, it's a keyword. It's easier to plan with. The Mourned, and the fact that it has recall synergies as well makes it a little bit better than the Flight, but I don't love the Flight. And if anything, as you said, I probably would also just use it as a blocker for Teemos and Gringlade duos. So
Good thing that you bring up Gringlade duo, because this is probably one of the biggest use cases where I think it's better than the Flight. Because Gringlade duo needs you to summon units over and over again. By recalling this guy, you can actually trigger your Gringlade duo over and over again. And I think they will play out quite differently, because there are different regions. Like in Ionia, you don't just really want to go to the late game and sit around. and you want to be aggressive, so one will probably attack more often than stay back to block. It's a little bit of a tricky card to rate, in my opinion. You play an Ahri run, for example, with it yet? Or
Yeah, my first run was with Ahri and Ahri and Cannon. That went 4-3. I personally don't think before I played it, I didn't think Ahri or Cannon were particularly strong, and I don't like the recall archetype. And afterwards, I also think it's very tricky to play, very tricky to play against. And even after jumping through all the hoops that Ahri and Cannon offers, I don't think the effect overall is that much stronger than just solid stats on a board. Basically, you're kind of doing all kinds of magic tricks while someone just smacks you with their fist. So um, that's how I see kind of Ahri Cannon versus a normal tempo-based expedition deck.
yeah, that's a fair point. And I'm not sure how to really rate this yet. Didn't play with it that much. I had like one Ahri run, but it was like a super control-y deck with like Field Rush and Nivea. There was a ton of Frost Bites where like this card didn't do that much. You have to test it a little bit more. It's like a pretty hard card to rate in my opinion. Hard to play as well. Like attack with it turn 1, do you keep it back? It's an interesting card for sure, I would say. See how it works out in the future. Next
The
one.
fact that
Oh, yes, okay.
the fact that it's a 1-mana creature as well means that every time you're playing it, you're kind of getting a little bit more behind on the board in that it's stopping you from curving out. You can't just use spell mana, like spell mana into it so that you can play your other creatures on curve as well. So on turn 3, you're maybe playing this again and another 2 drops instead of playing a 3 drop. And that's how slowly you're getting behind on a board. And you're trading your board for their Nexus health. And as we all know, Nexus health doesn't matter until it's 0. So unless you're very aggressive, that might not be a trade you want to be doing because you might be doing more damage with this, but your other creatures are too small to get through. So
Yeah, that's the point, but I think in some matchups you don't ever win the board. For example, if you play like Ionia decks versus Demacia decks, or Demacia Battle City with Poppy, you will at some point lose your board because they just do the tempo thing better. If they play like 3 mana 3/4s, 5 mana 4/5s, you just play your random elusive creatures, you won't be able to stay on the board that long. You at some point have to turn over and say, I have to go face now, I have to Nexus damage. I have to use these small elusives now to get the last points of damage in before they inevitably kill me with like a rally, for example. And for example, like this card way more than the Navori Blade Scout for that reason. Depends, a little different reason, because the Blade Scout is also an elusive, but it can stay on the board, but this Mourned can give you multiple Nexus damage. I just think that Ionia in general is not really that much about getting a tempo advantage in the mid game. Think about Zed, for example, they all want to be very aggressive and then push in the last bit of damage with elusives.
that's fair.
So I'm just showing the Navori Blade Scout again. This is like when summoned, give me elusive this round, can be compared with this other thing. But it stays on the board as a 1/2/1, you don't have to replay it. On the other hand, you can't replay it. In some decks you would like to be able to replay the Blade Scout. Okay. Let's move on to a little bit of a better one, I would say. The Woodland Keeper. And I was really surprised. I almost died to this card twice now. And it's a 3 mana 3/2. When it's summoned, give me +1/+0 and elusive this round. And this can add up to a lot of damage. Just 4 damage elusive, that's 1/5 of your Nexus health. And if they recall it, then they can trigger it again. It still seems a little bit more of a combo card than an always good card. But I've certainly died to it almost twice, like I said. Here with the tree, for example. And they copied this and they played it again, and there was 8 elusive damage. Not a card to underrate, but I'm still not a big fan of these random combo cards. So I will say it's okay, but not amazing. I will give it a 7 out of 10. can certainly be powerful. Win your games in the right deck. Your average deck, it will just deal 4 damage and sit around, which is okay, but not something I would be like higher than a 7 out of 10. Wilgerat gives it a 9 out of 10. Surprising again. I think this card will often games on its.
Coco gives it 5 out of 10. And I think it's amusing the terminology we use because you think it's okay and you rate it 7 out of 10. I would rate it as decent and I would give it 4 out of 10. I think comparison to Navori Bladescap is fair in the sense that it's something you want to be playing on your attack turns. You rarely want to be doing this defensively. But it will work in a pinch in that it's a 4 mana 4/2 elusive on the defense on the turn that it's summoned anyway. So if you really need to block something with, for example, Poppy, it's a 4 power creature there. Or if you need to block something that has elusive, it will do that as well. 3 mana for 4 Nexus damage is a decent deal. It's not a bad deal, and as you said, it's a fifth of your life total, so which is quite a lot. And if you can manage to get any recall synergies with it, then it will keep coming back for more 8 damage, 12 damage, etc. But after it gets elusive, it's just a 3 mana 3/2 in the end, which is not great, and it will probably just trade with another 2-drop. So it kind of comes down to how aggressive you're being, how much you want that elusive 4 Nexus damage.
I think oftentimes it will come in quite handily, these 4 damage. And sometimes you can recall it, you can re-trigger it. It's not like it's always sitting around doing nothing. And we oftentimes get 8 damage out of it, and 8 damage is pretty nice. Worth it. But I think, yeah, we have a little bit terminology differences. Maybe it's not like, yes, I think it's good to put it into your deck if you want to be aggressive. Maybe I like go down 1 grade. I think you convinced me. But go down to a 6 out of 10. But it's like so powerful sometimes. It's like, I find this card weird as well to rate. Because sometimes you just lose to it, and other times it does nothing. Let's give it a 6 out of 5 out of 10. See how it turns out. 0.5 for me. Okay, let's move on to the next card, the Pathless Ancient. A 4 mana 4/3 that costs 2 if you've recalled a unit this round. One thing I want to mention is I really like how basic these cards are. Like some other card games, they just release overly complicated cards over the time. As time moves on to have like new effects, and this could be a card that would just be in the base set and you wouldn't notice. It's just something nice to have in a game that stays simple and doesn't get over complicated expansion. Maybe not yet, maybe it will still come. Something I wanted to point out. I think a card I would compare this to would be the Patrol Wardens. It's a 3 mana 4/3 that costs 1 less than drawn. This says it costs 1 less, and the other one says it costs 2. And yeah, I don't think this card is. I think this card is a little bit worse because if you don't have this effect online, then it will be a 4 mana 4/3, which is playable but not something you want. And the recalling, then it still costs 2, but even if you play a 2 mana 4/3, that's not that big of an upside. It's a little bit better, but on average I would still give it like would give the Patrol Wardens a 5 out of 10, just an average filler creature. Sometimes you play it cheaper. I think this card is a little bit worse. I would give it a 4 out of 10. This guy is really high on it and says it's a 8 out of 10.
Coco gave it 4 to 8, depending on the bucket. Unsurprisingly, I'm very low on this. I gave it 3 out of 10. I think a 4 mana 4/3 is over costed. I generally wouldn't want to be playing that without some significant upside, like 2 Mushroom Clouds. This guy, yeah, I think comparing it to Patrol Wardens is fine. And with Patrol Wardens, if you played with a 2-mana 4/3 is nothing exciting unless you can get it down on turn 2. Then it's actually pretty good. And even then, sometimes it will trade for their 2-mana 3/2. With Pathless Ancient, it's very unlikely you'll be able to get him down on turn 2. The only way I can think of is you play the Mourned, you attack, recall, and then you can play Pathless Ancient. But even then, you've used your attack token and you can't attack with your 4/3 anymore. So it's not like the old the Butcher with the Shadow Owls. The
I
name
mean
escaped.
the 1/1 that summons a 4/3.
Yeah, it's now 4/2 and these days. Yeah, it's not like that. You don't get to have a very aggressive turn 2 anymore. Um, so yeah, overall, I think uh, it's overcosted, and at times when it's undercosted, the 2-mana 4/3, it will probably be at a point where those stat advantages won't matter as much anymore. So if you are doing this effect on turn 4 or 5 or so, the fact that you manage to generate a 2-mana 4/3, which is about 1 mana overstatted, it won't affect the flow of the game too much because by then the opponent will likely also have similar sized creatures. So.
Yeah, I agree with. Okay, then we have the God Willow tree. This is like the new card that's in the most new buckets, and it's like even in Shadows and Dust stuff. I think it's like in 4 or 5 different buckets, and it's a landmark. Play, recall an ally to summon an ephemeral copy of it, and then for countdown 2, summon another ephemeral copy of it. Interesting thing you can do if you recall the ephemeral ally with Ahri, for example, with another card, with Homecoming, stuff like that, then actually loses the ephemeral in your hand and becomes a normal copy. Probably all have seen it in Constructed with Cannon already. If you summon an ephemeral cannon, then you bounce this cannon, it turns into a normal cannon. And I've found that this card can actually be really powerful in some situations. And like, of course, you have to build around it a little bit. You have to have synergies with it, and you don't just like put it into normal deck and say, "Yoo-hoo, I've got 2 ephemerals out of it, I'm happy." But with synergies, I think it can be quite strong. So, and this really reaches like far for me again. And like, for example, Misadv first just gives it an 8 out of 10, and I would say it can be um, from both from like a 1 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10 depending on your deck and on your synergies. And I know that's not very helpful. On average, it's like a 4 out of 10. But I really think that if you build a deck around it, if you have like Ahri, for example, and recall your value units, then you can actually do some pretty sick stuff with it. What I did, for example, in my Ahri Freljord run, I had currently Tavern Keeper, and then I played this card on the Tavern Keeper and played the Tavern Keeper again, then recalled the Ephemeral one, played Tavern Keeper again, basically gaining me 12 life over a few turns, and that was enough to outgrind the aggressive deck I was facing. So definitely a synergy card, a combo card, but I think it can be pretty powerful in the right deck.
I agree that it's pretty hard to rate. I think Hoko agrees as well in that he really wasn't sure and didn't give a rating for this. Despite it being hard to rate, I'm going to start it on a 2 out of 10. This is not an effect that I generally want to be having because I think it's overall negative tempo. The effect. So how I see it is generally you want to be using this on your offensive turn. So you want to be attacking with the ephemeral copies rather than having them around to block because all that will do is just threaten for them not to attack into you, uh, essentially giving you a barrier. And they still have the opportunity of doing that. This is an obvious recall synergy. If you are not in an Ahri or Cannon deck or Yasuo deck or something, I don't think there's an effect that you want to be doing. You really need to be squeezing that value out of that, because I think having this at a slow speed, and recalling your ally, and then you need to pay the cost to play it again, um, really means that you're quite behind on a board, especially on that countdown 1 turn, where you're actually without that creature. So on a defensive, you're going to be even more vulnerable. So overall, I don't think this is an effect that I want to be putting into my deck too much.
Yeah, like I don't think it just works with the recall synergies. You have like, for example, a set, and you attack on turn 4, you can recall your own set, still have these double shadows on the board, and then on turn 6, when you get to attack again, you can actually have 2 sets on the board, because you then like play on turn 5 your set you just recalled, and then the lantern goes down to 0, and you get another set, and you get 4 shadows, for example, which can be pretty powerful and hard to stop. And I think there are a lot of cool synergies going on with this card. I really like the design of it, but I agree that it's hard to rate. We'll definitely play with it a lot.
Yeah, I think it's very tricksy. I think with all of these, for the rating, the question is generally, do I want another 3-mana 3/3 instead of this? If the opponent just plays a 3-mana 3/3 on curve in response to this, is this better or is this worse than that? And I think it's going through a lot of, jumping through a lot of hoops, sometimes failing, sometimes not being able to do it because you just don't have the right situation on board, sometimes being vulnerable to removal. I guess this one isn't, but you need to have the right scenario on the board. And even when it does, it's only slightly better than a 3-mana 3/3. So that's why I think overall, I think it's not a particularly strong card.
Yeah. Let's see how it works out. Okay, let's move on to a pretty easy one to rate, I would say. Memory's Cloak. Very weird card. A 3-mana fast, and pick an ally being targeted by enemy fast spells, slow spells, or skills with only one target, stop them. This card, interestingly enough, is like in the Ahri bucket, and this is the only card that was added to the Shen bucket. So basically the shield wall, protect your allies with barriers. This card is in this bucket as well. And I would say this is just unplayable. You have like Deny before. Deny is like stop a fast spell, slow spell, or skill, and you can stop everything with it. And even this card is way too situational for expeditions, because you generally want to be proactive instead of reactive. You can't really play these slow control-ish decks. And like the Memory's Cloak is just weaker, because it just targets stuff like that targets your allies, and you can only have like one target, so Make It Rain doesn't even get countered with it. And it's 3 mana, which is worse than 4 mana, because it gets countered by Notify. Not really a big reason. But if you're like in these reactive spells, you want them to be as uninteractive as possible. And yeah, I don't really see any advantage of this over Deny, and Deny is already bad. So I really miss the draw 1 on it. Like, if it says draw 1, then it would be playable, and would be fair still, I would think, because they have to actually target your stuff with a spell, and probably be too strong and constructed. But for expeditions, if I put draw 1 on it, I would play the card, but without it, I wouldn't never play this card, so I just give it a 1 out of 10. Basically the lowest rating we have. And Misadv gives it a 3 out of 10. What do you think?
So Herco gives it a 5 to 7 out of 10. I'm very low on this as well. I gave it a 2 out of 10. I think the comparison to Deny is fair. It essentially is a 1 mana cheaper but a lot more restrictive Deny. And I already don't like Deny for the reasons you said. I want to be more proactive. The advantage over Deny with this is that it can technically stop multiple spells, in the sense that if they stack, 2 fast spells or 1 skill and 2 fast spells, then Memory's Cloak can counter them. But really, that shouldn't be happening unless your opponent is bad, because there's not really too much reason to loading up on all your fast spells, especially now that this card exists, loading up all your fast spells together, unless you really don't want to give up priority to your opponent. So the slight advantage over deny, other than the 1 cost, it just doesn't happen much, especially not in expeditions, because there's not too much reason why someone would just use 2 mystic shots, one in at the same time rather than 1 mystic shot, one after the other after they resolve. Yeah, so overall, I think it's a pretty bad card that I don't want to be playing with. If it had draw 1, then that's something else entirely, because by itself it would be a 2 mana. It would be a 2-for-1 by itself. If as long as you manage to get its effect, which in a lot of games you won't even get that. So yeah, it will certainly be playable.
Just as a question, you think this card is as good as the tree we just looked at, as the God Willow Seedling?
That's fair. I do think this is worse. But yeah, I rated them the same at 2, so I could go down to 1 for this as well.
Because I don't think the tree will be as bad as this card. Okay. Yeah, that leaves us to no, one more. 9 lives, another card I didn't spot yet, and a very weird card. It's a 5-mana burst spell, which says summon a Liminal Guardian, and Liminal Guardian is a 5-mana 3/2, and summon a 1-cost follower from your regions. When I'm recalled, transform me into 9 lives. A very interesting one. This is the first burst speed summon in Ionia. Before, only Shurima and PNC had access to burst speed summoning. Had the Scuttler thingy, the Jury summoning burst speed scrap Scuttlers, and we had Azir's Arise and the Clocklings summoning Sand Soldiers, and the Clocklings called The Time Has Come, summoning 1 or 2 Clocklings. So this is definitely a unique card. It's also an epic, which I haven't seen yet in expeditions, so it doesn't come up that often. And if you just look at it from base value, it's a 5-mana 3/2 with a 1-drop, so basically a 2/1. That adds up to a 5/3, which is not amazing. But it can be cast with spell mana, so I think that's makes it a little bit better. Still not a card I'm like super happy about. It has some cool combos with like the tree, for example. If you play this, keep the 1-cost follower, you recall it with the 3, you get another one of these and another 1-cost follower, and then you get the spell again in your hand. So it has some synergies, but I find it still a pretty random card, and I wouldn't really want to put this into my deck at all. I would give it still a decent stats for the cost and its spell mana, so I would give it a 4 out of 10. Misrael is a little bit lower on it and gives it a 3 out of 10.
Herco gave it 5 to 8 out of 10. I'm pretty low on this as well. I gave it 3 out of 10. I think a 5 mana for a 3/2 plus a 1 cost. Let's say it's a 1/2. You said 2/1/2. 1/2 is kind of similar. So essentially, it's a 5 mana 4/4, which is pretty understated. Obviously, with this being a spell, especially a burst spell, that is okay, but it's not at a cost where it's particularly useful, in the sense that you might be able to float turn 1, turn 2 with this, and then play this on turn 3 and immediately attack. But even then, that's not that much stronger than just kind of playing a 3-drop, really. The effect that this can be 2 burst spell attackers or 2 burst spell defenders only matters sometimes. When you really want to open attack and you want to go wide, that can be helpful. Or sometimes when you want to surprise them and with some surprise blockers when they open attack, that can be helpful. But overall, I think that convenience doesn't come in helpful enough for the fact that this is so overcosted to make this a good card. So overall, I think it's pretty weak. The recall transforming into 9 lives. I don't think will be used that often. Before this, we've had Concussive Palm, which is not a bad card, but more for the effect. Um, and for that one, we rarely saw the 3/2 monk being recalled much. Obviously, now we have more recall synergy, so there's more possibility of that happening. But really, if you're recalling him, what you're doing is essentially you're kind of probably chump blocking and recalling so that you can do the 9 lives all over again. And I don't think you're generating too much value there, even when you are doing that. So
The
overall, I'm not high on this.
dream would probably be like this is the only one that says one cost follow from your region. So like Mono Ionia, you burst, they open attack you, you burst speed summon 9 lives, the Guardian, and the Shadow Fiend, the 4/3 4/3 ephemeral, and you really get them. That's something for clips, not for regular gameplay. Okay. Shadow Fiend additions, but something that someone will probably pull off sometimes. God, this card is amazing. Okay, this leads us to our last champion. We are almost done already with all of the cards. And the last champion we have to cover is Ahri. And there's a skin, interesting. Ahri is a 2-mana 2/3 with quick attack in Ionia. And on attack, the first time I attack strike, swap me with the ally to my right, then recall it. How this works is Ahri has quick attack, so she strikes and doesn't get hit back, and then she moves to the right. Of course, I can just block the unit to the right, then Ahri would die. But if the unit on the right is an elusive unit, then they can't easily block it, and your Ahri evades the combat completely and recalls the other one, so it doesn't get struck either. Ahri naturally plays well with elusives and levels up when you've recalled 6+ units this game, which I found a little bit much and a little bit hard to pull off in a reasonable time frame in expeditions. It can be easier like in UC or Socked. When she levels up, she gets elusive, the famous she puts off your cloak, then gets elusive. And then she has basically the same attack, but it doesn't stop anymore. Like, you don't only recall your first ally, you recall like every ally to the right. And this can be pretty powerful. He also has the effect when you recall an ally, reduces cost by 1, and then her signature spell is the charm. We can talk about later. It's a little bit hard to rate Ahri. I would say she can be played in many different ways, and like she can be played as just like a aggressive unit with elusives. I try to complete the recall sub-theme very quickly. I had a lot of success with her in the first one. It was on another account. This is why it's still 0 mastery points. Was just the value Ahri, where you just had a random value unit you wanted to recall, then some frost spells to prevent your Ahri from dying, and get effects from recalling over and over again, which I found more compelling than the aggressive Ahri expeditions, because you just have more random mid-range units, more combat tricks and expeditions than constructed, and less reliable access to elusives. So Misrael really likes Ahri, and he's like, I give it a 10 out of 10. Best card in the set. Ahri seems broken, or Ahri looks broken to me, he says. I'm a little bit lower on Ahri, like a lot lower on Ahri. She is obviously just a 2-mana 2/3 quick attack, would already be okay. You can just attack with her on the right side, so you don't have to recall anything. And the recalling is just a little upside, but she still takes up a champion slot. So I would say she is more on the lower end of champions, more of like a 5 or 6 out of 10 for me. But a 5.5 out of 10.
So Herko didn't rate Ahri. I having played with her a little, I rate her 4 out of 10. And this is relative to other champions rather than just all cards in general, because champions generally are a bit overstated, overtuned. I think on a base, a 2-mana 2/3 quick attack is decent, but gets outscaled into the late game pretty quickly. And as I mentioned before, she's very tricky to play against and very tricky to play with. There's a lot of decision points you can make with her. So she has a very high skill ceiling. Um, and as a KDA fan, I am glad that she's joined Runeterra, but unfortunately, I feel, and I think the design on her is very good. I like the fact that they've almost managed to replicate her Spirit Dash on her evolved form perfectly. Um, but I think you're still jumping through a lot of hoops for not a huge payoff. I think having just 2 damage quick attack means that if you don't give her a boost with something like Twin Disciplines or Cloud Stance, she very quickly gets blocked by someone who uh, will have more than 2 toughness. And a lot of the time, you wouldn't necessarily want to be recalling a unit. From the times when I've been playing with Ahri, maybe half the time I would want to recall my units, half the time I wouldn't. Uh, Obviously, we get that choice, but the fact is, recalling your own units is negative tempo because you have to play it again. So only if you have a lot of value units that you want to be recalling, would you want to be doing that. So she's still pretty fragile, I think. So yeah, I would want to play her with stat boosts such as Twin Disciplines, Cloud Stance, or Flamespitter, funnily enough. So yeah.
Yeah, I think she definitely is one of the most flexible champions which you can put into a lot of different archetypes. For example, Pantheon, you always have to build around combat tricks, and the cannon you have to build around recalls to make him buff. And Rumble is a little bit flexible as well, but you still need like some discard synergy, some cards that generate other cards. But with Ahri you can really be experimenting a lot with Battle City and Flamespitter, with Valiant and Value combat tricks, with just Ionia and Elusives. So I really like her design as well. I think they perfectly incorporated her identity. I think they did it for all of the champions pretty well. Like Pantheon a little bit. Still like Pantheon, but it doesn't really feel like Pantheon that much to me. League just flies in and he kind of does that as well. I really like the champion design of in general of this game. How they take the League characters and put them over into the game. Definitely Ahri as well. Definitely a card we will have to play more with and see how good she actually turns out, and we definitely will. Okay, and the next one is the Charm. This is just the Ahri signature spell, and it's a 2-mana focus spell. The second ever printed focus spell. That's a physical card. First one would be Exhaust, and this one says recall an ally to give an enemy vulnerable this round. So you can't do this in combat. You can't do this in response to a spell. Like from your opponent, if they cast Concert a Circle on your card, you can't play it in response to it. But this card is really unique in that it solves a problem for Ionia. Ionia having no access to hard removal before. And Ferret has a similar problem. Ferret has Caught in the Cold, being the 2-mana, give an enemy Frostbite and vulnerable this round. And I really like having 1 or 2 Caught in the Colds in my Ferret decks, since Ferret doesn't have access to any direct removal or hard removal in a sense, or strike cards in general. This is similar to Charm. I wouldn't normally want Charm, it would be in other regions, but because it's in Ionia and because Ionia usually just gets recalls and stuff like that, I think I will always opt to get at least 1 Charm in my deck from now on. Still is a very situational card. You have to recall an ally, so you want to have a small unit on the board, you have to have something you want to kill with the vulnerable keyword. I'm not too high on it, but I will rate it higher than I would normally. Like I think it's a decent card. Let's give it a 5 out of 10. Like, obviously you don't want 10 of these. You want 1 in your deck, and then it's like a pretty good effect. If you have 2, it's okay. If you build around recall, you can have more than 2. But it's not insane. Misria gives it a 7 out of 10. What do you think?
So Herco gives it 3 to 4 out of 10. Personally, I gave it a 3 out of 10. Um, so I think the comparison to Exhaust, as you said, is interesting, because this is essentially a 2 mana focus spell that gives vulnerable and it recalls an ally, which, like Vlad, essentially is supposed to be, is normally a downside, but could be an upside for the recall synergy decks. Whereas Exhaust is 1 mana focus spell, gives vulnerable, but then gives it -2/-0, which is always an upside for us. And Exhaust I'm okay with. So how do you compare Charm to Exhaust then?
You say you are okay with Exhaust. I would say like the first Exhaust for me is an 8 out of 10. Really like this card. But it's a little bit different as well because it's Shurima and Shurima has a lot of these effects. So if you have like Ruthless Predator, you have like other removal spells. I think Exhaust is like an 8 out of 10, the first one. And this is I give like Charm and 5 out of 10.
Okay, fair enough. I guess I'm slightly lower on Exhaust and a lot lower on Charm because I think it being more expensive and me having to recall an ally, and I normally don't like recalling my allies, um, uh, makes me think this is a significant cost, and I normally wouldn't want to put this in my deck. Not even the first copy. Obviously, you can't get around that if you have multiple Aries, and unlike the Rumble champion spell, I do see the advantage of having Charm being Ahri's champion spell in the sense that you can essentially charm a small creature with 2 toughness, uh, challenge it with a creature next to Ahri, and then Ahri will quick attack into it with her 2 power quick attack, or maybe even bigger if you manage to buff power as well. But obviously, with any of these, it's pretty vulnerable to any combat tricks or uh, frostbite or anything like that. So I can see the synergy, but still, it's not a card that I really want to be putting into my deck.
Yeah, I think it's even more flexible than you give it credit for with Ahri. Because you can, if they have like one elusive blocker, and you have a bunch of elusive units on the board, then you can play the Charm and challenge it with Ahri directly. Then Ahri will strike the elusive unit and then move to your own elusive unit and doesn't get killed by that, and your other elusive units can't be blocked anymore. I think it's a really flexible card in multiple ways. That's something I only didn't get before.
So when Ori attacks, she swaps with her ally on the right. That ally on the right then becomes on her left, and that ally doesn't get to attack anymore, right?
Yes, but it's like to push and damage. I mean, you have like 3 elusive units on the board, and there's like one elusive blocker, and they're like at 6 or 7 life. Then you can play Charm, recall one of your elusive guys, maybe replay it even, and then challenge the elusive unit with Ahri. And then Ahri strikes the elusive unit, maybe doesn't even kill it, but then moves to the right and strikes again. Damage because the elusive units got through. That's what I mean.
So that generally is only an upside if Ari has greater power than your elusive unit, right? So if you are attacking with Ari and then Dancing Droplet on the side, then you're upgrading that 1 point of damage to 2 points of damage. If you're attacking with, say, I don't know, the Woodland Keeper with 4 attack, and you put that on your Ari's right, Ari will swap places with that. Ari will do 2 damage, and then Ari will do another 2 points of damage, effectively elusive, but the Woodland Keeper wouldn't do the 4 damage anymore. So you're actually downgrading in terms of damage there, right?
Yeah, but only if you have like just the Woodland Keeper as an elusive unit. Like I'm drawing this on the screen for the viewers to see. Basically, my example is they have like one elusive blocker. Let's say a 2/2 elusive, and I have Ari on the board, and a Doublet, for example, the 1/1 elusive, and I have a 2/2 elusive, say, and the 4/2 elusive, for example, the Woodland Keeper.
Does this happen much in Expedition? So many elusives?
Yes, like if you look at the Ari card pool, it's like all elusives. It's just like because they are at 6 life, that's why my example, they're at 6 life, and then you can challenge the elusive with Ahri, and then it moves over and deals even 8 damage, and you upgrade it a little bit by that, and you prevent the elusive from blocking your 4 damage, otherwise you wouldn't have lethal that way. Like if the elusive would block your 4-2, then you would have just 5 damage instead of 6 damage. This might be confusing for you, but I've tried to draw it for the viewers so they might like follow my explanation more.
Okay. I mean, is this at this point, is there any better or worse than exhaust here?
It's worse than exhaust, obviously, but exhaust
Right.
is a different region. Like,
Sure.
exhaust is an 8 out of 10, and this is a 5 out of 10.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I still feel like it's a significant cost to recall an ally, and only if you can use that to your advantage quite significantly. I think giving an enemy vulnerable this round is not that worthwhile.
Then, how would you compare the Cordon the Cold to exhaust?
Caught in the Cold. I think that compares favorably to this. I prefer that over this.
Like, not Cordon the Cold to charm, Cordon the Cold to exhaust.
Oh, um,
Of course, Cordon the Cold is better than this one as well, despite it being like
okay.
slow speed.
So
But
if that's the case, I think I probably prefer exhaust there because I like the focus speed of exhaust. I like the fact that it's cheaper, and -2, -0 is often enough that I'll be able to trade up. I don't need it to frost. Like essentially, if it has 3 or more power, then Caught in the Cold is reducing it by more. But if it only has 1 or 2 power, then exhaust is doing its job the same. And the fact that it's focus does matter. So
yeah,
you can exhaust and then attack immediately. So
because for me it plays in that like Freya doesn't have any other ways to directly challenge a unit or make it vulnerable. You only have like frostbites usually, so that's why, despite like exhaust obviously being the stronger card, I would still like make a Freya rating for the Freya card and then a Shurima rating for the Shurima cards. Those two cards would be pretty close together in rating just because Freya needs this effect more than Shurima, opinion. This is like similar for me with the Ionia Charm. It's a bad card, worse card than Exhaust, but Ionia needs it more.
I also think that, I mean, most expeditions, we're not playing with one region, right? We're playing with multiple regions, sometimes 3 regions. So yes, Ionia might be reduced in terms of these kind of effects, but it has other effects to round out those differences. So uh, often you'll be able to make do. So
Yeah, obviously, but like it still affects you. If you want to draft like Ionia Freljord, you always had the problem to be like you can't kill any units basically. Like Aria Nivea, or like Aria Nivea or Karma Nivea. It's supposed to be the best control deck with like Enlightenment, but it can't even kill any big unit. You can't just recall them. I think for example in this deck it would like help to have Charm and Cordon the Cold. Kinda getting lost on this one card. Let's talk about the other 3 cards as well. Very interesting discussion for sure.
mhm.
Okay, next up we have Windsinger. I have not really played this card yet. My games have ended before that. But it's a 6 mana 4/3 with play recaller unit. And this seems quite good to me. Obviously, you want to look at your curve and be like, how many 6-cost cards do you really need? And if you are very aggressive, you don't really want that many. And I think this card is still a good effect. You of course can target your enemies' units. You don't have to recall your own units. But you can recall your own units if you want to. This is basically a 4/3 is worth like 3 to 4 mana. And then we have Willow Seedling on top of it. You basically gain 1 mana. Usually combining 2 cards together makes the card better. So I think this card will be good. The decks that want it. If you're an aggressive elusive deck, you don't want this card because it's like a 6-drop, doesn't have elusive, doesn't kill your opponent. If you're like a little bit of a slower Ionia deck, then this will be decent, I would say. Like in your average Ionia deck, I would still give it just a 6.5 out of 10. Because I think the average Ionia deck doesn't want this card. Like, only if you're like playing the more slower side of Ionia, the Chen, for example, or Karma, then this card can be like an 8 or 9 out of 10. The average set deck, Aurelia deck, like Ahri deck, doesn't really want the 6-drop opinion. Maybe Yasuo will, but it depends on the champion opinion. Misadv gives it a 9 out of 10.
So Hoka gives it 7 to 8 out of 10. I initially thought this was pretty high at 8 out of 10, and playing it makes me convinced that it is also pretty good. So I'm maintaining its rating at 8 out of 10. I think what you said in terms of comparison to Will of Ionia plus the 4/3 is fair. So I think you're getting quite an advantage by playing essentially Will of Ionia on a stick, as we call it. 2 cards in one, you're kind of getting a 2-for-1 there. I would much rather. I have not actually used it as a recall on my own units yet, because if that's the case, then that is pretty overcosted. Recalling your units is generally worth only 1 mana. That recall spell, and that's hardly even played. That's not a particularly good card. But also that this is effectively a slow effect in that you can't use it if they open attack, which is one drawback. That said, I think this is kind of a perfect game ender or curve topper for aggressive decks. In my experience, what's happened a lot is even when I'm aggressive and most of my creatures are smaller, having this to effectively recall and bounce their 6-drop if they're curving out rather than double spelling is very powerful. And then on my turn, I get to open attack. And a 4/3 isn't huge, but it's big enough, and the rest of my creatures will be enough that should be enough of a tempo swing that that might be enough to take it to lethal. It's obviously weaker if they are double spelling and playing 2 medium-sized creatures rather than 1 large sized creature. These are the kind of things that you want them to invest as much mana into their creatures as possible before you recall it. You don't want to be using this to be bouncing 2 mana, 3 mana creatures. Ideally, you want to be bouncing, 5 to any higher units. If that's the case, then you got a pretty good deal out of it. Otherwise, they can play around it by playing multiple spells. But overall, I think this effect is pretty strong, and I think it's a very good card.
I agree that it's like a good card. My rating is only so low. Maybe for that, Arthur, can you tell me the rating of Herco again? Because I didn't quite catch that.
Herco gave it 7 to 8 out of 10.
5 out of 10. Basically, my point is it will be an 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 if you want it. But I would say half of the Ionia champions don't want it. Cannon doesn't want it, Aurelia doesn't want it, Lulu doesn't want it, Set doesn't want it. Sin maybe, but not really, I would say. The other 4 or 5 want it. Half of the decks it will be a 8 out of 10, and the other half it will be more like a 4 out of 10. So I'm averaging out in like a 6.5 out of 10. Okay, this leaves us with only 2 epics. And the first one is the Sai'nen, 1000-tailed, and I had the fortune to open this one in my Ahri run, play with it, and it felt like really, really strong. It's of course a little bit understated, but it serves 2 different roles. As a 6 mana 3/5, when I'm summoned, draw 2 and give all other allies +1/+1 this round. You can use this as kind of like a curve topper for an aggressive deck, similar to the Windfairy Hatchling. As this is like the 4/2 that buffs all your allies +2/+2 when summoned. Sai'nen is weaker in that regard, and if you play it in like a slower deck, it's a little bit weird because then you don't use the buff effect as well, but the draw 2 is like more valuable. So what I did in my like control deck, which was built for the late game, I played Sai'nen and then I played Dawn and Dusk on top of Sai'nen, drawing me 4 cards in total. Then I recalled one of the ephemerals, drawing cards again, which is of course a dream scenario, but it can generate you a lot of value. On an average deck, I would say it doesn't usually do that, and it's a little bit weird because you either want the draw 2 or you want the give other allies +1/+1 this round, oftentimes. Because if you are very aggressive, you don't really need 2 more cards, you want to end the game. If you are defensive, you don't have any much poisoned usually and can't use this buff effectively. And since it does two different things, I would say it's not that strong, and it's just a 6 mana 3/5 on the face value, so I would still give it similar to Mythial. Mythial gave it a 7 out of 10 as well, and I will also give it a 7 out of 10 in average deck.
Herko gave it 6 to 9 out of 10. I was initially a bit lower on this, but after having played with it and also seeing the stats on it, I'm a lot higher on it. I would give it 8 out of 10, and despite Lord Guardian only having about 4 days worth of stats at the moment, it's currently the highest card from this set, Magical Misadventures. But that should normalize in a week or two. But it has a very high win rate at the moment. And I think the reason for that is, despite it not playing either side particularly well, being aggressive like Windfarer Hatchling or drawing cards when you want to control, it does both sides decently well. And if you say draw 2 is worth about 2 cost or sometimes 3, let's say 2, then it's essentially a 4 mana 3/5 that gives +1/+1 this round. That's pretty good deal. And then if you're getting that effect as well, both on one card, then that's even better. So I think that's why overall this is actually a pretty decent package that will help you defend and help you survive into the late game. And then in the late game, you can capitalize on the advantage that you've just drawn 2 cards off this creature. And giving your other allies +1/+1 this round is deceptively good because it puts them in a position where if they want to trade, whether you're on the attack or on the defense, they are generally disinclined from doing so because they know that buff is only temporary. So if they're trading with you, it's often because they need to. Otherwise, they will prefer to wait until next round when they won't be getting that temporary buff anymore. So overall, I thought this would be a little bit weaker, but I think it might actually be stronger, even though it looks quite understated, just because draw 2 is such a powerful effect.
Quick question, is Lord Guardian tracking win rate when played or when drawn? I always forget.
It's when it's in the hand.
The hand, okay, that's surprising. Because obviously when it's like played, the win rate would be pretty high. In the hand, and the win rate is still high. That's surprising, but it's like probably a good card then. And
yeah, I was surprised by how high it was as well. I originally probably had it at maybe 6 out of 10, but having played with it, it helping you to survive to the late game, and it being able to win the late game because you've just drawn another 2 cards is pretty strong.
Okay. Can see that definitely. I was a little bit more careful with my rating, but I can definitely see it being an 8 or a 9 out of 10 as well. That helps out to be nice to it. Okay, then last card actually, Children of the Forest. Forest, and this one is an 8 mana slow spell, which says summon ephemeral copies of 3 strongest followers you've recalled this game. And the comparison I saw for this one would be with the Harrowing. Harrowing is type Harrowing, it's not an Ionia card. Harrowing is a 9 mana slow Shadow Isle card which revives the 6 strongest allies that died this game and grant them ephemeral. Harrowing is one of the, I think, 10 cards in total that I rate 10 out of 10. Because it's such an insane tempo swing, you will always have allies dying, and the real strength of Harrowing is that you summon 6 units in one action. And basically, if you have no cards on the board, your opponent has like 2 or 3 minions, and you play this card, you have a full board, and they still have 3 units and can only play 1 more unit, and you will get through with 2 of your ephemeral units. Really big fan of Harrowing, but not that big of a fan of the Children of the Forest. You can manipulate it more with like recalling. You can like make it work more that you only get your good units out of this one, but it still also is like a higher effect. Or like you don't just get this randomly or naturally when you play this card. and sometimes if you just play Ahri, for example, recall your 1/1, Dancing Droplet, then summoning this Dancing Droplet doesn't really add that much value. You really have to set this card up to be worth it. I don't really like these high combo cards. It reminds me of the Dawn and Dusk, which is like amazing if it works, and terrible if it doesn't do anything. And summon 2 ephemeral copies of units. So I would say this card is pretty similar, and I'm pretty low on it for that reason. Of course, it's terrible if you have no recall synergy, then it's just like unplayable. But in general, I would still give it a 2 out of 10. Might win your game sometimes, but I don't believe I will. Mystical is high on it. Mystical gives it a 7 out of 10.
So Herko thinks it's trash, and I agree with that. I gave it 1 out of 10. I think comparing it to Harrowing, it compares very disfavorably. Despite it being 1 cost, it only generates 3 followers instead of 6 allies. So it can't generate you champions. It can only generate you followers.
I didn't know that. Making it a 1 out of 10 as well. But my sweet Hecarim dreams are gone. So
Exactly.
1 out of 10 for me as well.
Okay. And as you said, allies dying is fairly normal. Recalling is abnormal. You generally have to pay costs, play spells, play cards to recall your units. So the fact that this only gets you half the board, and the Harrowing, obviously it will fill up the board. So if you have creatures, then it won't always, you won't always be generating the 6 allies because your board is possibly full anyway. But the fact that this literally can't get you 6 creatures, can only get you 3, makes it pretty bad. I feel like even if they said 6 strongest followers that you've recalled this game, I would still be pretty low on it. So as it is right now, I think it's pretty unplayable. I can't imagine this ever winning very many games. So
my dream still was that I recall 3 Hecarims over the stand of a game, and then I summon 3 ephemeral Hecarims. They buff up each other and all of the soldiers, but even that doesn't work anymore. Sad. Just followers makes it really, really bad in my opinion. Yeah. So this concludes the review of all the cards in this new expansion. You've made it through and listened to all of our ratings. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And we hope you have learned something from it. And of course, we can't really rate these cards properly right now because we only played like 1 or 2 games with them. And maybe it turns out that some of these cards we rated bad will be amazing, or others that we rated amazing will be bad. I don't we can look back, and this is like the fun of it. We can look back at these ratings later on, like half a year, and be like, oh my god, what did we say? But I think we made pretty similar ratings most of the time, pretty good ratings. And if you just start your expedition runs, your expedition career, and look at these and take a first point on whether a card is good or not. Thanks again for watching. Leave a comment if you have any questions.